Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Stoa. Happy New Year for all the Stoans, and I wish you a very blessed 2021. For our first session in the new year, we have Robert Fritz joining us, author, management consultant, filmmaker, all-around artist, author of many books, including The Path of Least Resistance. And he developed something called structural dynamics in the creative process. And I was first introduced to Robert through my buddy and former manager at Dale Carnegie, Kevin Crome. Kevin was, it's his go-to guy, Robert Fritz, his methodology. So I was introduced to him a while back, and I'm very excited to have him at the Stoa today. So what we're going to do, Robert and I are going to just jam for the first 10, 20 minutes and put your questions in the chat. I'll call on you and mute yourself. And then you can ask your question to Robert directly. This will be on YouTube, so if you don't want to be on YouTube, just indicate that in the chat. So that being said, Robert, Happy New Year and welcome to the Stoa.
Happy New Year to you.
Is there anything before we jump? Is there anything you'd like to set the frame, or anything you'd like to let us know before I jump in with my questions?
Well, I think the one thing to say is that everything I do in one way or another comes from music. And that's my background. I'm a composer. I have a BM and MM from Boston Conservatory of Music, in major in composition, minor in theater. And one way or another, the things I talk about, the principles I talk about, are found in music. Whether they're organizational or about the creative process or about personal lives or personal development. In one way or another, they all come from music.
And I imagine a lot of people at the Stoa here are not aware of your work or your method, so I'd really like to get into it because it's quite delicious. But there's one line, I think it was in your book, or you said it somewhere, your soul will not invest in a compromise. It's like I got floored when I heard that. Maybe that could be a good starting point.
It was actually your spirit, but will not invest in the compromise.
Oh, your spirit, okay.
Yeah. So what is it that you want to know about that? I mean, isn't that true?
Yeah. I think everyone's nodding their head in the room right now. Anything you want to riff on that?
Yeah. Well, I think, in our day and age, we're being asked to not be true to ourselves. And what I mean by true to ourselves, I'm certainly not talking about true to your appetites, true to your whims. I'm really talking about true to your values and true to your aspirations. What matters to you most and what you hold as important in your life. And then I think the central question from a personal point of view is, can we and have we organized our lives around those things that matter most to us? And that's kind of the point I want to be making, that there's several points, but that's one of the major points, because that is about what is the outcome that we're trying to achieve through any process. Now, since my background is music, and since I come from the arts, the creative process, the real creative process, I'm not talking about creativity. I'm talking about subject matter. The creative process is practiced in the arts for, since cavemen, I guess, is the most successful process for accomplishment in history. It's certainly created all of the art, science, technology, architecture, and yet we don't learn the creative process in school. What we learn instead is to react or respond to circumstances rather than to have our choices be the central organizing principle of our lives. And the central organizing principle starts with a very simple question, which is, what do you want to create? And most people have not had practice in asking and answering that question, because mostly we've been taught to react or respond according to the circumstances. So here's the way you should be. Here's the way you should live your life. Now, there's another aspect of the creative process, and this is, again, very much tied with music, with film, with architecture. And it is the underlying structure of anything will determine its behavior. My first book was called The Path of Least Resistance. And it's really not about the easy way out, you know, the colloquial path of least resistance. It really is the physics version of that, in which energy moves where it's easiest for it to go. Now, what that means to us is that if you set up the underlying structure correctly in your life, the path of least resistance will lead you to where you want to go. But if you don't, it won't. Now, there are two types of patterns that structure produces. One is oscillating, and the other is advancing. In an oscillating pattern, you set out for something, you do what it takes, perhaps you have it for a period of time, but then in the story, in the pattern, there's a reversal. And at the end of the story, you no longer have what you want, and it's not a good ending, one that you would want to see again and again, although you will generally see it again and again. So the relationship that started out beautifully, but then went wrong, or the business success that turned into a failure. I mean, you know, we all have examples of oscillating patterns in our life. But the question is, where do you live? You know, do you live mostly in that pattern, or in another pattern, an advancing pattern, in which you set out for something, you do what it takes. That success then becomes the platform for future success. And you can then build upon that as you build your life, or you build organizations, or you build teams. And certainly it's very similar to how we make art.
And I wonder if you could unpack that more, the kind of the difference between structural conflict and structural tension, and the idea that structure determines behavior.
Well, let's start off with three principles. First is that energy moves along the path of least resistance. In other words, energy will always move where it's easiest for it to go. That's all it can do. Second principle is that it's the underlying structure that determines where the energy moves. So it's the riverbed that determines where the water will flow. And the third principle is you can change the underlying structure, which means you can change the way, like if we were engineers, we might be able to change the riverbed and thereby change the flow of water. And in our lives and in our organizations, we can do that. Now, the oscillating pattern is an underlying structure. It's made up of three elements generally: aspiration, desire, various levels of desire, reality, you know, what's real, independent of what you think is real, what actually is real, and a third element, which is concepts that we hold. Now, I'm not talking about positive thinking, I'm talking about all concepts, because what happens is the reason you have a concept is because you don't understand what reality is. When do we have concepts? When we don't know what reality is. You don't have the concept of what color your eyes are. You know, you just look in the mirror and you see. So, you know, sometimes I'll break this down into what I describe as the belief business and the creating business. And in the belief business, it matters what you believe. So people in the belief business have the strategy of conversion, you know, try to convert people to whatever the belief is. To people in the belief business, it matters what you believe. And people in the creating business, it doesn't matter what you believe. And people who have been masters of the creative process have believed all kinds of things, from political left to political right, from very religious to atheistic, from economically this to economically that. And And so what we can see from history is that it doesn't matter what you believe to be able to master your own creative process. What does matter are two data points, and we call this structural tension. Structural tension is when you know the outcome you want and you know the current reality you have in relationship to that outcome. And that difference creates a useful tension. Tension will always strive for resolution. Whenever we set up a tension, by the way, that's exactly what comes from music, 5/7 chord to a 1 chord, for those of you who know music. Da ba da da dum bum. We want to resolve that, that last note, because we set up a tension, we want to resolve it. And so the key is, in many ways, I'm gonna make this sound awfully simple, but it's not as easy to do as it is to say. But to enhance your creative process, number one, know what you want to create. And it has to be rather specific. It can't be just, some general thing. It has to be specific enough that you can organize around it. Secondly, know where you are in relationship to that. And then from that structure, you can begin to consider strategic actions. How do you move from here to here? And that then translates into an action plan. But all of those actions are motivated to move from where you are to where you want to be. Think of a painter, what a painter's doing. Painter has a canvas in front of him or her, has a vision in mind of what the painting should be. There's a difference between the current reality, what's on canvas, and the vision. The painter takes actions to have the painting move from where it currently is to where it wants to be, where the painter wants it to be. And that resolves the tension. And that's the essence of the creative process. But I want to tell you guys a story, though, about how, about the vision. So I audited this acting class with a master acting teacher. And I'm not an actor, I'm a director, but I'm not an actor. But there were, real actors in the room. And he said to one of the actresses, he said, give me $10 and I'm going to send you out of the room and I'm going to hide it. And you come back and you find it. Now, if you don't find it, I'm keeping it. So she gives him $10. He goes out of the room. She goes out of the room. He hides it. She comes back and she's looking around for it. And after the time was called, she hadn't found it. And he said to her, $10 doesn't mean much to you, does it? And she said, no. He said, what's that on your finger? And she said, it's my engagement ring. And he said, let me have it. And she said, she was very reluctant to let him have it because it was an heirloom from her fiance's grandmother. And it was her engagement ring. And so she reluctantly gave it to him. And he said, okay, you go out of the room and I'm going to hide it. And if you don't find it, by the time I call time, I'm keeping it. So she goes out of the room. He takes the ring and he puts it in his shirt pocket. So we all know she's not going to find it. He calls her back in and she is frantic. She's looking around for this ring. She's tearing in things and it's just unbelievable. And then he calls time and then he teaches his lesson. He handed her back the ring, by the way, so he didn't keep the ring. But he said, look, he said to everybody, did you, what was it like watching her search in the first time? Everybody agreed it wasn't very convincing. They didn't believe her. And what about the second time? And she said, oh, everybody absolutely got that she was frantically searching for something. And this was his lesson, that for actors, you have to be specific. You can't be generally looking for something. You have to really specifically look for something real. And I think that's a really pretty good lesson in terms of setting up a vision. You know, what is it you want to create? It can't be this kind of amorphous general thing. It has to be specific. And as you're learning how to create more and more and more, my recommendation is start small, you know, but things you really want. And then have structural tension, take the actions, create those things, and then have a pattern of success, which then begins to more and more be your orientation in life. And notice that in this example, there are no concepts. What there is desired state, actual state, action. There are no concepts.
I love that story. And I want to double click on knowing what you want or knowing what to pursue, because that's sort of like a perennial question, especially in this space of the Stoa. And you have nice distinctions of the fundamental choice and, you know, primary choice. And there's this quote that I'll kind of put in as well, that you said, if you limit your choice only to what seems possible or reasonable, you disconnect yourself from what you truly want, and all what's left is a compromise related to the spirit compromise thing. Yeah, so how do you tease out what to pursue and what you really want?
Well, you either know or you don't know, right? I'm looking for a yes or a no. I mean, you either know what you want or you don't know what you want. I mean, look, if you don't quite know what you want, you don't know what you want. You know, if you hesitate at all, you don't know what you want. So you either know what you want or you don't know what you want. Now, if you don't know what you want on some larger scale, you certainly know what you want on a smaller scale. You know what you want to eat for dinner. You know what clothes you want to wear. You know, there's several things that you know about that you actually want. There's no question you want them. So in this question about what you want, the first thing that people often do is put enormous pressure on themselves to think in some grandiose scale of what they should want or what they think will bring them what they might really want, but they can't name it. And so I think if that's the case, you see, if you know what you want, you don't have to say, well, I wonder what I want, because you know. So, but if you don't know, this is what I mean by start small, is start to create a pattern in which I set out for something, I created. I set out for something else, I created. I set out for something else, I created. And you begin to get two things. You get a real sense of how to create things. But secondly, you begin to think in terms of what do I want? And so the answer to the question, what do I want, becomes easier and easier because you, in fact, are becoming more decisive as you create one thing after another after another. There are general things that I can say that all of us want. And I'm just going to name them and see if it's true for you as well. We want good health. We want good relationships. We want interesting things to do. We want to be involved in our own lives. And I think those are things generally that most of us want. Maybe all of us want that. I hope you're getting my point here, because what you shouldn't do is go on a search and destroy mission about what you want. You know, beat yourself up, bang your head against the wall, you know, try to, where's the, you know, I hate these notions about find your passion. you know, and then you're searching around for your passion, trying to somewhere it's hiding around the corner or something. And I challenge the idea of even find your purpose in life. How do we even know life has a purpose? See, that starts with a pretty big assumption. Oh, you're here for a reason. Yeah, who said? How do we know that? Maybe it's true, maybe it's not true, but we have no way of actually knowing. Now, we can create a purpose for our lives. More importantly, we can create many purposes for our lives. But those purposes are things we invent, not things we discover. Same with the passion question. You know, people run around looking for their passion because they think they've been told that's a good thing. And that's supposed to be the road to enlightenment or satisfaction or happiness. But unfortunately, you've landed on the planet Earth. And on Earth, we have good days and bad days. You know, sometimes things go well, sometimes they don't. Sometimes we are involved with things that matter to us, sometimes we're not. And so in the realm of Earth, the question, what do you want, becomes something you invent. The question of does your life have purpose? Maybe you'll invent something if you want to, but you don't have to. You know, the premise is, and a lot of people carry this with them, and I want to see if you have this going on. Do you think you're a better person if you succeed and not as good a person if you fail? See, a lot of people think they're a better person if they succeed and not as good if they fail. But really, you're the same person whether you succeed or fail. And you're creating a standard of measurement which is unfair. And you know, like, you're better. Let me put some examples to this. Are you a better person if you are a good driver and not as good a person if you're not a good driver? Are you a better person if you're a good chef and not as good if you're not a good chef? Are you a better person if you're a good pool player, but not as good a person if you're not a good pool player? You see how almost silly it sounds. And yet, a lot of us measure ourselves by our own successes and failures. And that then becomes a matter of identity. And one thing about, it's really important to know, the most recent book that I've written with my co-author, Dr. Wayne Anderson, is a book called Identity. And in the book, one of the major points we make is it doesn't matter what you think about yourself to be successful in the creative process. I want to repeat this. It doesn't matter what you think about yourself. Now, we've been told it does matter. And the whole self-esteem movement has the premise that what you think about yourself will lead either to success or failure. And what we say in the book is it's as if the people in the self-esteem movement have never read a biography of successful people in their life. Because if they had, they would have seen that most successful people have had low self-esteem. Name the person, Churchill, Mother Teresa, Elvis. We name a lot of rock stars who publicly say they have low self-esteem. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Einstein. And see, if you disconnect what you think about yourself with what you want to create, you do not make a connection between those two things, suddenly you're free to fail and succeed and not have it be a reflection on you. You know, you're the same person, you tried something out, it either worked or it didn't work. You know, you did your best or whatever you did. And there's separation between you as creator and the creation that you make. And that separation gives you enough distance to have a relationship with what you're creating. I hope this makes sense to you because it's so, in many ways, foreign to what everybody else has been telling you. And all of the books you may have read about how you're supposed to love yourself and be nice to yourself and et cetera, have positive thoughts.
Right. Yeah, I'm loving it, and I sense intuitively sense people are resonating with it. So I'm going to pivot to the Q&A now. Pranab, you're up first.
Hey, I really enjoy your YouTube videos. I think that's where I learned first about you a couple years ago.
Oh, really? Thank you.
For sure. What are some of the biggest blocks or failure modes you see in the creation of good structural tension? And where do you see people going wrong?
Well, one of the major things is the thing I last said, excuse me, about judging themselves based on how well it goes. And then you have mixed motives. It's not about bringing this thing into being. It's about bringing this thing into being, proving I'm okay, or et cetera, et cetera. So that's probably the most prevalent one, is making identity issues part of the creative process. And then it's just a matter of, in terms of the creative process, there's the skill of it, the orientation of it. The orientation is about who you are as creator in relationship to the creation. The skill of it is structural tension and the action plans and all of that stuff. And then there's a spirit of it. As human beings, we really love to create things. We love to bring things into being. And I don't see big obstacles in that. In other words, they're not blocks to overcome. There's more unlearning, if you know what I mean. It's not like, oh God, I've got to, deal with my past, or, relive and release traumatic experiences or any of that kind of stuff. It really is more practice, just like learning music. You practice and you get better.
Any follow-up question?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool. Laura, you had a question.
Hi. Yeah, I was wondering, what would you say the factors are that not only make art, but make great and transcendent art, like profound art that kind of, speaks even more?
My latest book that I've just finished writing, it's not published yet, but it's The Path of Least Resistance for Artists. And I think, I don't know that I really have an answer to your question, because I don't necessarily agree with the premise of the question. I love pop art. I love Beethoven. To me, it's hard to create an evaluation of, oh, this is better than that, or this is better than that. But I do have one way of describing what I think is workable art in my book, which is that the success of a piece of art is that it creates its own universe. Like, you go to a movie that's a really good movie and you live in that movie. You can even live in that movie while you leave the theater, and, maybe for a day or so, you could live in that movie. That's created such a strong universe that you can live in that. And, so can, songs or an ad in a magazine, or, and so it's hard for me to make an evaluation about what's supposed to be high art and low art, even though I'm classically trained. But I also write rock and roll.
Yeah, not in terms of genre, but maybe what's really soulful, when it really feels like something speaks incredibly deep, that affects you, or it's incredibly vastly vast, but that quality of kind of, not just entertaining or kind of meeting you emotionally, but bringing you, deeper in some way. Does that make sense? Do you feel that?
Well, it depends on what deeper means. Different art does different things, so it doesn't have to be I don't think of it psychotherapeutically, that it's sort of like a Rorschach test. And, I mean, what's wrong with enjoying some very clever, wonderful thing that Taylor Swift does? And she's so good at songwriting. I mean, she's just unbelievable. There's a way that she captures high school. Her high school songs are so amazing because they so capture what it's like to be in high school. I don't know if you know her work, but that you say, well, what could be better than that if we're looking at a high school experience? I mean, it's humanity. It's really, there's something human about small things as well as large things. And so I can't quite answer your question the way you presented it, but I mean, some art's very moving and some art's very funny. And there's a whole range of experiences one can have. And I don't think there's any particular evaluation of what's better than another. And there are certainly things you might like better than others, and things that move you more than other people. Other people may be moved by other things. But I think it's the vision of the artist. Was it successful? Did you accomplish what you set out to accomplish? From an artistic point of view, that I think is really quite important. I hope that answers your question. I don't feel that I did a good job with it, but I tried.
I thought that was a good answer, actually. Yeah, it's the range of human experience rather than the
Yeah.
All right, Nicole, you had a question.
Yeah, thank you. This has been super enjoyable so far. I actually almost want to change my question based on the answer that you just gave, Robert, to Laura's question. But I think I'm going to stick to my original question because I'm super curious about the relationship between creativity and freedom. You mentioned at the beginning of the talk that the artist has to have a sense of what it is that they want to create starting off, and that's supposed to guide them in the process. And I'm wondering, kind of like within that process, where does the freedom come in, and like the creative, the kind of like perhaps I could even like use the word like something like imagination or like imaginative freedom or like creative freedom. Where is that evident within the whole thing? Is it in the beginning stages of the formulation of what the artist wants to create, or is it along the process as they are creating?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question that you're asking, actually. And I have a very specific answer for you, because in a way I've set my whole life up to have artistic freedom, which means to write what I want to write, to write the music I want to write, to make the films I want to make, et cetera, et cetera. The Robert Frost, in a poem called "It's Hard to Keep from Being King When It's in You and in the Situation," that's the title of the poem, says the kind of freedom an artist seeks is not granted by kings. And I think that, this is not something that someone can give you. Yeah. So no one, you can take editorial control of your life. Now, freedom is where the realm of freedom that we're talking about is that it's your, I'm going to talk about it from a life point of view versus an artistic point of view for a moment. It's your life. You get to call the shots. A lot of times people feel they're not free because of the circumstances they've set up. And actually what's going on is they've painted themselves into a corner. Sometimes I call it feeding the beast. You have the house and 2 kids in college and you keep working to earn the money so as to support all that. And it seems like you have no choice, but in fact, you do have a choice. And the choice you've made is a rather altruistic one, at least about the kids, is to support their education. And that you may not be able to completely transition from a more, a life that feels obligated to a life that feels free. Right away, but you can make a transition where your choices have more and more dominance over time. And you have more freedom in your life to choose the kind of life you want. What kind of work do you want to do? What kind of relationships do you want? What's the kind of optimal health that you can create for yourself, and so on. So for myself, I'm totally free to write what I want. I'm only limited to my imagination and talent. And what I do write, by the way, is besides the books I write screenplays, and this past year I wrote a play. I wrote children's stories. I write music, and so on and so on. But I had to learn how to do that, and so the limitations in the beginning were my abilities, which I had to develop. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that was great. I just have a quick follow-up then for you, if you don't mind, Robert. I guess I'm curious about whether you believe that a person can live their life artistically without ever actually creating anything.
No. So I have this story in my new book. So I'm talking to this guy, and he said, well, I feel like an artist. I said, yeah, what kind of art do you make? He says, well, I don't make anything. He said, I just feel like an artist. And my follow-up line is, I can feel like an astronaut, but unless I'm really an astronaut, it's not going to put me on a rocket. I mean, the nature of art is that you produce artifacts. That's the nature of being an artist, that you make art. And I have a friend who's very famous, who deals a lot with philosophy and theory. And he made this interesting point. He said, the difference between the arts and philosophy, he said, in the art, you actually have to produce an artifact. In philosophy, you don't. So I think in terms of the arts themselves or itself, is to be an artist, you actually have to make art. That's the nature. It's like to be a doctor, you actually have to be a doctor. To be a pilot, you actually have to know how to fly planes and fly. So that's what I think.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's go with Jack. You just put a question.
Hi there. So yeah, could you just comment on the value, if you think there is value, of a meditative practice within the creative process or structural thinking in general?
Well, I think it's a very personal thing. I mean, some people like to meditate, some people don't. If you find it valuable, it's good. If you don't need it, it's not like it's necessary. But if it works better for you, then that's therefore a good thing. I don't have a general idea about it. Do you meditate?
Yeah, I do. And at times I've used it sort of in relation. I also write poetry, and sometimes it seems like they're very much in concert with each other. But yeah, so I was just wondering if there was sort of, if it was something you generally advise or not. But I think I agree with you. It's of course a personal thing.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And related to that question, Ryan, you had a question about Robert's daily practice of creation. If you can unmute yourself.
Yeah. Hi, Robert. Thanks. I actually used to live in Brattleboro, so right next to you.
Really?
Yeah,
Hi.
for 10 years. I miss it dearly. But yeah, I was wondering what your daily practice of creation looks like. Sounds like creation has to be.
Well, it depends on the. Yeah, it totally depends on the project I'm working on. So, for example, I, as I told you, I just finished a book, and with that, basically, I sit down and I write it. But before I write it, I basically wrote down all of the points I wanted to make in the book. And I also wrote down what I want the reader to walk away, having read the book, what I want them to either be exposed to or understand, or et cetera, et cetera. If I'm making a film, one of the first things I do, I don't even have a story yet. First thing I do is I put dates on a calendar. I'll be making a film between, May 2nd and June 15th. If I don't do that, my calendar will get booked up. So it's the very first thing I do is I save the dates. Second thing I do is I hire my lead actors. And then once I have them, I have the dates, I have the actors, I begin to play around with the structure of the film. I then structure the story. I use 3-act structure, and I have, I do it quite traditionally. And then finally, the last thing I do is I write the script. And that's because I've created so much, and because I already have the lead actors in mind, I'm specifically writing it for those actors. And then later, there's a whole other process about scheduling the film, shooting the film, and so on and so on. The whole time I have structural tension. Every moment of that, I've got different aspects of structural tension for the entire project. And that makes it work really, really well. That's a more complicated project. A film is a very complicated project. Music's a very different thing entirely, because music, I find it so easy to write that I just do it. Now, I have learned how to do it, so it's not like I have so much talent I can just do it. But I spent 6 years in the conservatory, so you'd think I'd learned something after all that. Does that answer your question, Ryan?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. It sounds like the different mediums of creation have different processes. And it also,
Yeah.
what I'm hearing you say is almost like there's always a purpose, and there's a built-in accountability to your creation. Like you hire those actors.
I wouldn't say there's always a purpose. I'd say there's always a result.
Mm-hmm.
And where do you live now, by the way?
I'm actually in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Yeah, but I miss Vermont every day.
Yeah, thank you. Vermont's great. Yeah.
Alex, Warren, you had a question.
Yeah. So the question is, well, I relate to the part about identity and making the creative results like connected to my identity. And then, so that's something to deconstruct, I suppose. But then I'm just curious about more reflections on how one works with that. And then, and I'm assuming that's connected to the oscillation, and that's how at least I've experienced myself. So just what thoughts come up there?
Well, of course, I recommend the book Identity, because we really develop those ideas, which are really quite, in a way, they're quite revolutionary and maybe rebellious, in a good sense. But the main thing is, look, I'm going to say this, but it doesn't necessarily mean you'll understand it at the level that it needs to be understood. But it really doesn't matter what you think about yourself. And I mean, I know that seems so like heresy from the modern age we live in, where we're told it does matter. And there's so much manipulation from the time we're little kids. There's so much manipulation about how we see ourselves in relationship to how we act. You're a good person if you clean your room, and you're not a good person if you don't. And you're a good person if you do your homework, and you're not a good person if you don't. And then these become the standards of measurement, and we begin to think it's important how you think about yourself. But it doesn't matter. Look, let me put it to you this way. No matter what you think about yourself, you still want good relationships. You want good health. Doesn't matter what you think about yourself to want these things. You know, you want meaningful work. You want to have a quality of life that you want, no matter what you think about yourself. It's so independent of whatever you think about yourself. But, you know, in many ways, we've been sold a bill of goods that somehow we have to connect how we see ourselves with what we want and therefore can create. And it's simply not true. And it's not true, by the way, historically. So I do recommend you read biographies, and you'll see over and over and over and over, the most accomplished people in history did not have high self-esteem and did not think well of themselves. The point was they didn't think about themselves at all. That didn't matter to them. What did matter was what they were creating, what they organized their lives around.
Any follow-up question, Alex?
Well, I'll just throw this in then. Like the logic that comes up for me personally is that, oh, but how I think about myself affects how I show up in relationships and like how accepting I am of other people, which then is affecting like my capacity to collaborate with people, and which seems like a big part of you know, creativity. At least that's my story that comes up. So I'm curious to.
Yeah, I mean, you know, just to say it plainly, no, you're wrong. You know, first of all, about you showing up in relationships, don't you want to just show up as yourself and, you know, have a relationship in which they actually, whether, you know, why do you want to be around people that you have to be a different way than you actually are for them to have a relationship with you? Are you getting what I'm saying? Why can't you be yourself? Wouldn't you rather have relationships in which you're really yourself and they like you for how you actually are, not how whatever it is that you're putting on? Secondly, the motivation to collaborate is because you have shared structural tension. I mean, there's something that you and others want together. You're aligned around whatever that is, and you're all of you are describing reality or understanding reality and taking action on behalf of the outcome that you all want. And there's no particular way you have to be. I mean, of course, you know, it's better to be cooperative than uncooperative, professional than not professional. But that doesn't define you. That's just a skill set. And it's just deciding to make it work versus not make it work. So the premise is that you based all of those things on that you just said. Just simply, and look, here's the test. Try it my way and see if it works.
I dig it.
Yeah,
And I appreciate your deconstruction of how I'm thinking about all this.
Yeah, well, you're not alone, and you come by it honestly, because we've all been taught that.
Stefan, you had a question. Oh, you're on mute.
Hi. Early on, you talked about, I guess, sort of a prerequisite of knowing what you want. And I just want you to kind of clarify that. I think you might have walked it back a bit, but it seems like, especially in the creative process, there is this conversation. I mean, I would say it between like a calling and a response. A profession is a response, but it could be, you know, with you have a muse or a genius or a daemon. So could you, it seems, so could you, elaborate? So I have a follow-up, but that's basically it. Where does improvisation fit inside that process? Not knowing where you're going to end up.
Yeah, well, improvisation is spontaneous composition, right? So if I'm improvising something, I do something, which then becomes an antecedent, which creates a consequence. And that creates something else, and that creates something else. So, you know, but even in improvisation, let's say I don't know the actual thing that will come out, but I have an aesthetic, or I have an idea, or I have a vision of what would be what I'd like it to look like or how I would like it to come out. And that then becomes an organizing principle. But, you know, so when Lee Strasberg was young, he went to the theater one night and there was an actor he just absolutely loved. So the next night he brought all of his friends to the theater. And that night that he brought his friends, the actor wasn't good at all. And he was told, well, that's the trick of the muse. You know, that's the actor's problem. Sometimes you're inspired and sometimes you're not, and then blah, blah, blah. Well, a while later, the Moscow Art Theater came to New York. That was the one that Stanislavski was the director. And Strasberg went night after night, and every night, everybody was great. The major roles, the minor roles, everybody was absolutely fantastic. And he realized that there was a reliable creative process that he then started to pursue. And I mean, there's a lot of controversy about this or that approach toward acting, but the point was he knew there was a reliable creative process. Now, I personally have had the same quest, as it were, as a reliable creative process. And mine is more, I tend to be more structural because I come from music, which is more structural. So I personally hate it when I'm inspired, because what happens when I'm inspired is I get so excited that I can't work and I can't sleep and I wear myself out. And when I finally wear myself out, then I can get to work, you know? So and certainly you should ask yourself this question, all of you. If you're running on things like inspiration and passion and emotion, what do you do on days you're not inspired? What do you do on days that the muse is not with you? And professional creators, people with deadlines, with budgets, people, you know, who have to produce quality of work, they can't rely on the good days and the bad days. That they have to rely on professionalism, that they can really create no matter what. And so I hope that answers your question, because in the spirit that I think you asked it, it's not about improvisation or composition per se. It's about finding those things that really work for you to produce what you want to produce. And not have it be a matter of the heat of the moment, because that will pass.
I like that. It reminds me of that saying, the difference between a professional and an amateur is a professional shows up whether he's inspired or not. And what also came up is Keith Johnstone, the guy who wrote Impro. He was on the Stoa recently, and there's a good contrast to this this talk. So I recommend everyone check that out too. But we're coming to the end, top of the hour, and we have a session right after this, so we're going to close soon. But any kind of closing thoughts for you, Robert? Anything that came alive during today's talk?
Well, I thought your questions were great, and I love chatting with you. I'm sorry we couldn't have more people, you know, to talk with. And for those of you whose cameras are on, I really love seeing your faces too. You look great. Just if you want to know more about our work, www.robertfritz.com. Also, if you go to Amazon, you'll see all my various books there. And on Amazon Prime, there's a few of my films that you can get. These are dramatic feature films.
Very cool.
I guess that's about it. And just to thank you very much, Peter, for inviting me.
And I'll make some closing announcements in a moment, but we'd love to have you come back, maybe discuss identity with your co-author. Maybe we have a screening. We're doing more film screenings here at the Stoa in the new year too. So maybe the film that you sent me, that might be a good addition. But thank you so much, Robert, for coming to the Stoa. That was a treat. So upcoming events at the Stoa. We have one coming up right now at 5 p.m. Our Sense Maker in Residence series for the month of January, The Bridge Deep Dives with Evan McMullen. You can check that out. And then on Wednesday, we have Anita Woolley, who's one of the leading academic scholars on collective intelligence. She's going to talk about that. So you can check out up there, and you can check out our website for more events, Patreon to support us while we steal this culture, and our mailing list. So that being said, thank you everyone for coming to the Stoa today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Robert.